It's October the 2nd. It was supposed to be this one. I have no idea how that happened. It's October the 2nd, 2024. I'm going to be your host. Yeah, done it again. Can't win them all. I must have smurfed up there somewhere. Who cares? Whatever. It doesn't matter. So these reactors in Japan are quite a problem. I don't know if you appreciate it or not, but they actually detonated. The entire inventories are gone. I have a poll tonight for everybody. Has Japan declared war on humanity by hiding nuclear fallout and shipping food from the nuclear wastelands? I see we're crushing it with 6 people. Yeah, I've been doing the show for a decade, but we also got my BitChute channel. There's over 800 videos on this channel, same as my YouTube channel. And you can see the censorship is pretty brutal. Which is really strange because up till recently I was getting hundreds and several hundred views on each video, but all of a sudden in the last couple of weeks I got nothing. And so I'm trying to get verified, and so I have to show that so that they know it's actually Dana Durnford's channel, right? On BitChute. Oh my. What are we going to do with journalists? We got Israel is now threatening to blow up nuclear reactors in Iran. And what do you think Iran's going to do? Going to blow up our reactors, the Dimona anyway, in Israel, right? And, I mean, Benjamin Netanyahu clearly has gone on a rampage. The minute that they stop, he's getting arrested. There's crimes against humanity charges against him at The Hague, I think. Or somewhere, anyway. I mean, what Iran done, Iran's got hundreds of thousands, say 300,000 of these missiles, supersonic missiles. And they got just as many sophisticated drones. It's enough to do what they done yesterday for about 4.5 years, if you double the numbers. And Israel's Iron Dome can't stop that. And so Israel, of course, every time they feel frightened, they threaten nuclear. They're destroying all kinds of communities, and they're not, they haven't killed very many Hamas, but they sure as hell killed a lot of Palestinian children and women. They're idiots. They're 4th biggest weapons misery producer, weapons on the planet. So when you look at these reactors, you see the media, they're actually pretending they're in a building that doesn't exist. This happened. This really happened. The radioactive fallout covered the whole planet. We've done radioactive research expeditions for 4 to 5 months a year after year after year for 6 years. From Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. And those 3 skiffs by myself, no less.
Well, we got the big one up.
And we hit this in every direction. There's no direction that I didn't go out and research. And we just took our time and meandered through the ghost lands where there used to be thousands of species. Bear with me, I'll show you some of those species. That was a typical day. But the species to your left are exterminated. So they need a nuclear war to cover up what Fukushima has done, basically. And then the health effects, heart problems, liver problems, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome. The cancer clusters, on top of that, started in the 70s worldwide after decades of atmospheric weapons fallout. plus the heart problems and diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, it could all be traced directly to the radioactive fallout. And the first studies they do after a nuclear meltdown are on autism and Down syndrome, as we've covered many times, right? So the species to your left, I went back for 5 more years after the original research, first year of research lasted like 7 months on the ocean. And the species were completely wiped out. Now, I used to be a commercial diver, and so I'm very familiar with that coastline and the East Coast, right? You know, I got like 14,000 hours under the ocean, so there's nobody going to tell me those species never existed. Because I've had surgery on my hands 5 times just to get sea urchin spines removed. And this hand here went right to the bone and out the other side. You can't get it out of the bone. So if I press too hard on this, it's very painful for many days. And so 6 hours a day on the ocean floor, I think I know quite a bit more than the nuclear apologist does. The species to your left are exterminated. After going back for 5 more years, the species didn't recover. The radioactive fallout, there are many, many, many models. And we didn't rush anything. I took my time and meandered from Vancouver, British Columbia to Alaska. Because the reactors really did melt down. Despite the official story is that never happened. Even though that's the official pictures. You can go to TEPCO's website and get those pictures. But you go to UN, they'll tell you that didn't happen. So what's going on? They don't want to be blamed for all the health problems, the catastrophic health problems. They don't want the nuclear industry to be blamed for the extermination of the species. Those pictures to your left, you'll never take those pictures again. That's an extinction event. And 14 prefectures were banned by 55 countries for over a decade. And you know, I don't comprehend how this story is not the most important story on the entire planet. And I don't comprehend how this information is not the most important information that somebody can learn. So they can try to figure out ways they can protect themselves and their loved ones and their friends, their families, and their communities, and the insects and the birds and the mammals and the animals. Because, brother, you better start thinking about that stuff. And the plutonium, of course, these models are only based on 20 days. Same as Xenon-133 models, only based on 19.5 days, 468 hours. And think of a plume that covers the whole planet in 19 days. It's pulsing energy at the speed of light. It's never going to go away. It's been going on for 80 years. That's global warming. And it might sound complicated, but it's actually not if you're honest. Think of a snowstorm in Japan, and then the whole planet, eventually it covers the whole planet, and the snow never melts, it never stops snowing, and the snow never goes away. Flip that into radioactive fallout, and then you're being honest. And your whole world now changes. The radioactive fallout in Washington was 450,000 times above detection levels. And persisted for weeks. Now, they're talking about the Xenon-133. We have many studies of different isotopes. It's not just xenon. And you can't have a plume where it's just xenon. The thing is, they can discover xenon with the equipment that they have, and then do mathematical equations to extrapolate the other isotopes. And think about inhaling this stuff, because you did. Increases the radiation exposure by a factor of 1 trillion. You can't compare X-rays and CAT scans with inhaling the particles. To get in your body, they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light every second. Your body attacks with white blood cells for the rest of your life, trying to build a tumor around it. Ultimately, that's what it'll do if you live long enough. But what goes on is if you get a lot of, each one of these atoms, anthropogenic man-made atoms that are in your body, they're pulsing energy in every direction like an explosion. They're wrecking chromosomes and DNA and cells, and we're talking huge numbers per atom. Your body has to repair all of that too every second. It just can't do that. And so your immune system is compromised. And as you bioaccumulate more of it, your immune system is more compromised. So you're more susceptible to pathogens and viruses that were normally harmless and innocuous and benign. Let's keep after it here. We got lots to get through. We got lots to get through. Hi, everybody. Hugs for everybody. Hi, Joey, Richard, James, Colette. And there's 15 people on the video. I don't know what happened with the door opening routine. Oh, you know what happened was last night we had to use the other side of the operating system. Right? Remember that? And I didn't recalibrate. I should go do that right now. But I didn't recalibrate. Let me just go and fix that so it doesn't happen to me again. I got a lot going on. It's not the greatest day for me. That's just the way life is, isn't it? Let me see here. We're almost ready. My apologies. Okay, let me just give this a try though while we're here. Let's see what we got here. Dana, any second, bear with me. Oh, that looks great. Yeah, because when you're doing this little trick that I'm doing there, right? It's about keying in the... It's about keying in. So let's see how the YouTube looks. Let's see, that looks great. Even though YouTube's a piece of shit. Alrighty, let's get after it here. Japan faces another dilemma, radiation-contaminated bodies. So after Fukushima nuclear meltdown, there was over 1,000 bodies they couldn't retrieve because they were so radioactive. But officially now, nothing got out of the reactor, despite all the headlines. And there's still a little bit... Let me fix that. Because when it comes to keying that in, so let me go backwards because you can see how everything go. So what you're doing is you're keying in the background color. And because the system I use is it's a very sophisticated system. It's very expensive. I'm not going to say the prices because I don't want everybody to make fun of me. But these are TriCasters, so they're ridiculous. And if you want any extra features like you see in here now, just this extra feature here cost me another $2,000. Just be able to do this particular stuff. And I have over 12,000 of these. And you need to tell a story. It's like Spider-Man and the Hulk was created by the nuclear industry. Same as the rest of these people. Like Superman uses Krypton. Krypton will give you incredible lung problems, liver problems after a nuclear accident. And how do you compete against superheroes? How does a parent or grandparents or aunt or uncle or the brothers, how can you compete against a superhero, see, in a kid's eyes? Because there's so many heroes, the kid's going to find one of them and idolize it, right? And in order to get rid of the word hero, they got guitar hero, rather, and GoPro hero. And in the old days, we used to just deal with our problem, didn't we? Criminal was a criminal. And we got rid of our problem. And then, no more problem. It was a simple solution. And now we let our problems fester until everything is dysfunctional. That was a big mistake. What to do? And by the way, I'm Dana. You can call in at 709-589-4406. I'll try to fix that now. Seven 709-589-4406, and you can donate in the description. You'll find it in the bottom of the description, PayPal, and directly to my PayPal account, and links to my site where you can use credit cards. And that site's been there for 11 years, nuclearproctologist.org. We've never had an issue with it. And we are still trying to do the moral and ethical thing. Japan faces another dilemma. So when they talk about leaking, like 450,000 times above detection levels of xenon-133 in Washington is not a leak. This is a catastrophic event, right? The bodies near the plant have been exposed to radiation, making them potentially dangerous to handle or move. And nearly a month after the disaster, decontaminating them so they can be transported is rapidly becoming impossible. So when they call this a leak, what are they doing? Are they insulting you? Or are they setting you up to be poisoned? Because these reactors are infinitely bigger than Chernobyl. At the top of each building was around 8 reactor cores and 2 fuel pools. And Chernobyl was a new reactor. It was a graphite reactor. It was a small reactor. And these are old reactors. So the fuel is pure uranium, pure plutonium. So each reactor core is equal to 100 Chernobyls or more. And so there's around 38 reactor cores melted down. It's around 3,800 Chernobyls melting down. We know this because of the research expeditions I showed you earlier. For the first 3 days of April, some 25,000 Japanese and American troops mounted a massive search. Now, they weren't allowed to go into those radioactive areas where there was 1,000 bodies. They had to leave them alone for thousands of dead or missing residents, but they did not enter the 12-mile exclusion zone around Fukushima plant, according to the Japanese government. Hence the reason there was over 1,000 radioactive bodies. The International Degenerate Agency, which is working closely with the Japanese government to monitor radiation in the water and the food, which is the biggest joke imaginable, does not know how Japanese authorities plan to deal with the Fukushima victims. The International Atomic Energy Agency, which is a corporation like McDonald's, has no sovereignty over any country and is basically 195 militaries. According to George Bush Sr., it's the New World Order, and according to Eisenhower, they're the military-industrial complex. It used to be the League of Nations, right? If it's a surface contamination, this probably was. Normally you could wash it off or wipe it off and remove the clothing to remove most of the contamination, said nutjob Kathryn Higley. I'll show you a little short video. I chopped off the regular video we uses of her. She's the head of the Department of Nuclear Engineering and Radiation Health Physics at the Oregon State University. This was her when she was young. And this is her several years ago. I can't remember if this was the Washington Institute or where the hell it was to. But she's doing a perp walk with a whole bunch of other criminals. And she's talking about, this is the very end of that long clip, 3-minute clip. She's talking about how she wears many different pins and everybody should cherish her.
World. It's a pretty small club. And we wear 20 hats. Today I put on 3 pins, and I could put on a whole bunch more. But Health Physics Society, ICRP, Certified Health Physicist, I've got NCRP on there, I've done IAEA. And so the point is, we're a small group, you should cherish us.
So how did they all know to laugh on schedule like that? And this is Kyle Vetter, which is a notorious lawyer. This is TEPCO's henchman. That's the one-armed bandit, Miles O'Brien, and White Dress Death Lady's ex-Nuclear Regulatory Agency. And the pig at the podium is Kathryn Higley. A horrific monster in all shapes and forms. Police in Fukushima put off collecting remains of the dead after measuring an extremely high level of radiation on the body of a man found on March the 27th. Extremely high radiation. Extreme high radiation. Extreme high radiation. Extreme high radiation. But according to the International Atomic Energy Agency, there is no releases as of August 24th, 2023, right? The victim's nails can be extracted for DNA testing for identification. However, nails also be decontaminated, and this will take a tremendous amount of work and time. So even the nails are so radioactive, they can't bring them to a laboratory. Over 1,000 bodies were left here. They didn't go in those areas. According to the ridiculous amount of documentation that we show. And so this was the area they'd claimed the only area that was basically contaminated. And you can see Okuma, Futaba, and Tomoka. The red square is Fukushima plant. On both sides of it is communities that are still abandoned, right, 13 years later. And Nami is about 7 kilometers away, to give you some scale. So what the crazy lunatics done, in 2022, the so-called white cream color, that was zones they opened where people were allowed to go back in there. And then last year was the yellow. And it's crazy. You see Buddy's house up there, he had to go. The red is a no-go zone. Not difficult to go by the nuclear wasteland. And that if he went to his house, he wasn't allowed to stop the car. He had to go straight in the house. You got to keep the windows closed. You can't use air conditioning. The reason they're doing this is so the industry can slowly convince people to go back into the nuclear wasteland. They're still growing food. They're so crazy they're growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. So over 1,000 bodies, highly radioactive bodies that he couldn't retrieve in the first 5 weeks, for instance. We need every piece of wisdom we can get. A hapless Fukushima cleanup. Engineers seem helpless in their effort to cope with the radioactive water, and workers aren't even getting proper meals. Well, the reactors were completely destroyed. There was 4 of them with 8 fuel pools. They were destroyed. And so this story is about trying to convince you that they went back in to the nuclear meltdowns. It doesn't work that way. And so when a journalist starts trying to sell you a story like that, then that's the appropriate image you should have in your mind of a journalist. Anyway, that's what a journalist is, right? The worst of the worst. The Japanese had initially turned down the French offer because it was coming from a company that was partially owned by Areva, which is French government itself, the world's largest nuclear supplier. I mean, their La Hague facility, the reprocessing site, has 500 security guards because it's like a banana and a potato chip and walking in the sunshine, right? They felt that the government of Paris should have offered them the robot instead. Well, Arriva is the government. A journalist is just another word for serial killer. Japan, a leader in the development and use of robots, was also reluctant to accept offers of machinery from the United States and Germany, and even equipment it did accept hadn't been put to use. That's because you couldn't go back to the nuclear meltdown. Because, it's multiple nuclear meltdowns. It's a lethal dose. No nuclear scientists have went there even today. $80 years telling you it's like a banana and a potato chip. Anyone listening to the reports coming from the emergency workers realize that the Japanese need more robots. Even today, they still don't have any robots. What was really interesting, and we talked about this many times over the years, is that there is a lot of humanoid robots, different companies out there. We've never seen any of them at Fukushima, have we? Surely they can put a paper chute on it and it'll be fine. Snicker. I mean, they were claiming, because we harassed them for years, and then he came out with a headline story claiming he burnt 7,000 paper suits at Fukushima incinerators every day. That's why they didn't have a big stack of them somewhere. Because the question was, if they're using 7,000 paper suits a day at a nuclear meltdown, if you took a nuclear scientist to a nuclear meltdown, gave him a paper suit, he literally would tear your head off trying to get out of there. Anyone listening to the reports coming from the emergency workers realize the Japanese needs more than robots. In fact, the workers at the stricken Fukushima nuclear power plant lack some of the most basic things like radiation suits, clean underwear, and hot meals. Again, nobody's working there because the reactor cores were ejected out of the buildings with the fuel pools, and they landed all over the site. The plumes covered the planet in that model in 26 days. You can't work there. It's a lethal. 3 sieverts is a lethal dose. Around reactor 1 was over 1 million sieverts. That's a sniper round, right? Workers at reactor number 3 say the nuclear fuel is gone from the spent fuel pool. Let me have a look at this. That's number 3. Oh, yeah, the fuel in the reactor core we rejected right out of the buildings. Initially, each worker... So they were trying to build a sympathy so you didn't ask questions. Remember when they had the Fukushima 50 hit behind a tarp and everybody else was holding the tarp up and they were wearing paper suits? Well, so was the Fukushima 50. You couldn't see who was under the paper suit anyway. You didn't need a tarp. It was about getting the media to justify not asking any questions. And the media has no problem justifying it. Each worker received only 1 water bottle a day. Of course, the idea of this story clearly is to drag you away from facts and take you into a fantasy. That's the only thing they're good at. They're exceptionally good at this. This is May the 5th on top of that, or May the 4th. It's 2 months, almost 2 months later. The men on whose shoulders the fate of the entire country of Japan rests are not even being given fresh underwear. Everyone is dreaming of a cup of tea. Really? You really think 2 months later that 1 bottle of water a day, no underwear, and dreaming of a cup of tea was going on at a nuclear meltdown? Do you really believe that? There was 16,000 people that ran away. They weren't workers. They were the homeless and the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. Most of the men wear white protective suits. These are that are normally used in painter's gear. These are not protective suits. We're at nuclear meltdowns where you got gamma shuns, you got X-rays, you got neutrons, you got betas, you got alphas. That'll penetrate through 6 feet of wood, for instance. The neutrons will go through 6 feet of steel. Do you really think a paper suit can protect you at a nuclear meltdown? And so when you see these types of pictures of people in paper suits, they don't know what they're doing. These are the homeless, the destitute. They're given a large amount of money, a promise of a large amount of money, but the majority of the people who went there originally would have died within a few days or a few hours. So we're in synthetic material normally used in painter's gear, disposable suits. And you can see how thin they are, right? These are paper suits. They can't protect you at a nuclear meltdown. It simply doesn't work that way. The men were not even given special shoes. No, because they were going to die that day. So the ICRP is United Nations. UNSCLEAR is United Nations. The IRPA is United Nations. International Atomic Energy Agency is United Nations. National Council on Radiation Protection and Measurements are all of them are heavily affiliated or created by United Nations, which is a military-industrial complex. Their job is to hoodwink you. They've taken over many facets of your life, assimilated many facets of your life, and the world has no concept. There's a small percentage maybe, but the general population has no concept that they don't have any authority, they don't have any authority over any sovereignty, over any country. The work begins at 6 a.m. The most important task is to pump water out of the badly damaged reactors. So these reactors are not badly damaged, they're completely destroyed, right? And so then they say to adequately restore the power supply. You can't restore power supply to any of these buildings, for goodness sakes. They don't exist anymore. And you're talking about huge inventories. Like if you walk in the building, you won't get close enough to it to walk in it. It's a lethal dose. And you see this hole is punched down in the building. That's some of the fuel assemblies, which is around 1,800 pounds. Here's your loving media pretending they're in reactor 4 at the top of the building, getting the fuel out of the pool of a building that doesn't even exist. And this is just a fraction, but it's very important.
Where I was standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here.
Where I was standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
So none of these people are in the buildings. So last night I still only got 143 views, and you can see the incredibly low numbers I got. So last month I never gained any subscribers. I actually lost one in 28 days. My total views on degenerate YouTube is 3.9 thousand views for a whole month's work. Now, the reason those numbers obviously are not going to be real, but the reason they're doing it that way is to get me as low ranked as possible. And so I record these videos now, and I'm posting them up at BitChute. And I might miss a scattered night, but I'm getting better at doing it every show. And because we know that, like last night's video was over 10 seconds longer, 12 hours later today, right? After 12 hours, my videos magically get longer. And it doesn't happen to anybody else's live streams. And you can't download the video for 12 hours. The comment section doesn't show up for 12 hours. In some cases, the men are groping their way around the pitch black interior of nuclear meltdowns, are they? Really? Does anybody really believe they're groping their way around pitch black interior? To the layman, be scared to death, said Lake Barrett. So Lake was an American nuclear engineer who headed the cleanup activities after the accident at 3 Mile Island. He said, you're working with salt water around your feet. That is not the way electricians usually work. Now, Lake Barrett, I got some video clips of him right now. What he done, he was sending people in for a minute at 3 Mile Island, and then they would never go to a nuclear site again. So they were getting lethal doses. They would have died that day or that week. And these were transient workers that he was doing it to. Let's play some of these videos.
For the first time, potentially fatal levels of radiation have been discovered outside the crippled nuclear plant, raising concerns that contamination is working its way further into Japan's water and food supplies and foreshadowing a long and expensive cleanup. Nuclear engineer Lake Barrett knows what it takes to mop up a catastrophic mess like this. Lake led the initial response to the 3 Mile Island accident here in the United States. He's with us this morning from Washington. Lake, where are the major concerns?
Well, the iodine-131 that you hear about, that has an 8-day half-life, so that decays away fairly quickly. I think they should be fine from a health point of view.
Lake, we're beginning to hear more about plutonium. What's the significance of plutonium in this situation?
Plutonium is something that is more emotional than it is technical in this situation.
It's more emotional than technical, eh? So toxicity of inhaled plutonium in beagle dogs, 144 beagle dogs. All the dogs died within 5.4 years. Tumors of the lung, skeleton, and livers. Bone tumors in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. And he said the findings in dogs suggest that similar dose-related biological effects could be expected in humans. But the problem is that the animal's kidneys are 50 times more efficient at removing the plutonium than the dog is. And by the way, the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rod is curium isotopes. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the plutonium, which killed all the dogs in all the studies.
Well, yes, there is some plutonium in there. There's always plutonium in reactor fuel. So it makes more emotional news to talk about plutonium.
All right, let's talk about...
So it's going to be decades and many billions of dollars to clean it up, but it's just a large industrial catastrophe internally to the plant. It's not a health catastrophe for the country.
865,000 extra cancers in the first year. That's a health catastrophe, if you ask me.
Not a health catastrophe yet, but here, lots of stuff appears to have been exposed to the atmosphere, and radiation is finding its way already into vegetables and the Tokyo water supply. So at what point in your mind does it become a health disaster as opposed to just an operational disaster?
You're going to start to have findings of some radioactivity outside for weeks ahead, so there'll be news about it. But I don't think overall it's going to be a huge health catastrophe that some people predict. Well, the iodine-131 day half-life, so that decays away fairly quickly.
So compare, if you will, this situation to what we saw take place at Chernobyl and the after effects of Chernobyl over the past 25 years.
Well, I think Chernobyl was a much worse situation. That was a Soviet reactor that basically blew itself up. And
yeah, but if you look at Fukushima, it blew itself up. Chernobyl was a brand new reactor, and it didn't have any fuel pools. These had 8 reactor cores and 2 fuel pools at the top of each of the buildings. There's 4 of these buildings. 38 reactor cores were lost. And the fuel is pure uranium, pure plutonium. Lake is a despicable. Can you imagine what he really done at 3 Mile Island?
Spread things all over the area. This is a different type of reactor. There's a lot of water and most.
So he's claiming that this didn't spread anything all over the area. It's contained to the site. So this is the problem, because this is an event. This is catastrophic to everything with replicating cells worldwide. So pretending that this is a non-issue is to cover a story. They need to cover up because they don't want to be blamed for
spread
the
things all over the area. This is a
right.
different type of reactor. There's a lot of water, and most of the radioactivity is kept in the water locally on the plant, although you can see, leakage outside the plant. But I don't think we expect to see a Chernobyl-type situation there.
Okay, Blake, thanks so much for joining us. It's Lake Barrett, a nuclear engineer and former deputy director of the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management.
And he was in charge of Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island. So for him to suggest that this is not as bad as Chernobyl, when Chernobyl was a single reactor, this is at least 4 reactors. It could be the common spent fuel pool in reactor 6 too, right? And we showed that evidence quite a lot. And each building had 2 fuel pools with around 8 reactor cores in it. And the reason that it might have been a lot more, but it has a lot into it because there's no repository anywhere worldwide, let alone at Fukushima. He's an American degenerate who headed the cleanup activities after the accident at 3 Mile Island. And 3 Mile Island, of course, reports of enormous increases in cancer. Infant mortality rates doubled. Birds disappeared. Many mutations. Allegations of pet deaths after radiation exposure supported by top universities, reanalysts at 3 Mile Island. People came home, they found their pet dogs they left tied on outdoors with their eyes burnt out of their heads from radiation. People came home to find animals with eyes burnt out after 3 Mile evacuation. Joseph Mangano, no need to focus on health, not money. Time of 3 Mile Island shutter and public health. Cancer rates rose 64% among the residents within 10 miles of the plant. From 1,700 to 2,800, cancer is pretty latent, right? So you should be looking for heart, liver, lung, respiratory, pituitary, thyroid, adrenaline problems, Alzheimer's, dementia, autism, diabetes, Down syndrome, before you start looking for cancer. And that alone should have raised red flags about the exposure to toxic radioactivity. And the death rate of infants under 1 month old around the site of the plant in Lebanon County, immediately downwind east, jumped 50% in the first 2 years after the meltdowns. And the rate of deaths in infants less than 28 days old rose from -7% to +1%. 136 excess deaths in just at 1 month old and less children. Remember Ernest Sternglass, the first scientist put a number on U.S. nuclear deaths, dies at the age of 91? So he reported infant mortalities, which had plunged steadily throughout the 20th century, was essentially unchanged in the 50s and 60s. Roughly 375,000 excess infant mortalities. The cause, the author, Dr. Ernest Sternglass, the physicist and University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine professor, theorized that the stagnation in infant death progress was the result of atomic bomb test fallout. God bless his heart, wonderful guy, eh? Somebody that finally spoke out. Three weeks have passed since the beginning of the disaster in Fukushima, and it is becoming increasingly clear how helpless and casual the plant operator TEPCO is in its efforts to cope with the accident. 3 weeks have passed. And the work at the plant to go on for 10,000 years. And that was an actual honest assessment. To this day, the company hasn't even put forward a strategy to regain control over the situation of the reactors. A German physicist and nuclear expert. Well, you got fuel pools and reactor cores tossed a couple of miles up in the air, and when you come back down, you got lethal doses all over that site. How the hell are you going to deal with that? You got plumes covering the entire planet. It's a catastrophic extinction event. But it takes a few decades for it to play out. I mean, like, the mortality events on the biggest animals on the planet is absurd, right? You got 10,350 gray whales in the last 5-6 years showed up emaciated. You had at the same time You had a mortality event for humpback whales dying by the thousands, and then they added another 7,000 onto that earlier this year. Emaciation. We covered that over the last decade multiple times a year when we're not on research expeditions. You have a mortality event for beak whales in the United Kingdom where there was over 1,000 in a single year, showed up in different stages of decomposition or dying, but the one thing they all had in common were they were severely emaciated. You got the same thing currently with minke whales. You got the same thing for pilot whales. You got the same thing, exact same thing for blue whales, for sperm whales. You see the same thing in seabirds, migratory birds. And the research expeditions clearly show this is an extinction event. But the way it's playing out, a lot of people, there never was many birds, there never was many insects. The average person is so complacent because you've never been exposed to the stuff we're talking about right now. They have no concept. And there were all of 50 radiation suits available for emergency at Fukushima. You can only use them once. You can't put them on again the next day. They did not call for enlisting the 8. If you survived that day, you don't go back anyway. These are meltdowns. This is not like you're in a forest fire. These are meltdowns. They did not call for enlisting the aid of the Japanese military. No, they said, send us people who don't mind dying. The homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who speak the language, the voiceless of society. There are now no sensors measuring radiation levels at the site. So these are, over the last few days, we got multiple stories talking about how there is no measurements. There was one, at the site itself, there was a couple of guys with a car driving like a Honda, was driving around the site when he finally cleared it out with a Geiger counter, and that was their readings they were broadcasting worldwide, right? The worst way you can take a reading is like that. And then, of course, with 1,000 bodies there, they didn't even go in those areas. So how could you be, if you can't go in those areas, how could you be safe working at the plant in a paper suit? There are now no sensors measuring radiation levels at the site. So it's such an important, of course they're not, because you got to report on it, right? And the numbers would be so extraordinary. The light I got today wouldn't be able to hold any water, right? Instead, 2 TEPCO employees rushed around the site in a white Toyota. I'm sorry, I said Honda, did I? Using a portable device to obtain the horrific reading reported by news agencies around the world soon after. Now, we actually covered a story similar to this last night, talking about the same thing. And there's a picture of it. I dug that up from the 2,000 pictures they released in the first couple of years. Water has since become the workers' biggest obstacle. TEPCO engineers initially pumped up to a ton of water a minute into the holding pools. Now, how are you going to pump water into the holding pools at buildings that don't exist, that are completely destroyed, that are nuclear meltdowns? At a nuclear meltdown, how are you going to do that? It can't be done, see? Into the fuel pools with the fuel rods in reactor 1, 2, and 3. Well, this is what reactor 3 looked like on day 6. That's what reactor 4 looked like on day 6. There is no fuel pools. And reactor 1 and 2 are complete meltdowns. Now that there's leaking out again, the turbine rooms, lower floors, and the hallways are up to 1 meter deep in standing water. The turbine is right here, this building right here, but clearly fuel assemblies from reactor 3 went down through the roof. You can see it's punched down, which means you can never get inside of these buildings, the turbine halls. Instead, 2 TEPCO employees, that was ocean, towards the ocean, right? Towards me when you look at these pictures, towards me is towards the ocean. Going that way is going inland. These buildings ejected the reactor cores and decades of reactor cores from the fuel pools all over the site. And worldwide within just a few days. First, the TEPCO men struggle to pour fresh water into the plant from above, and then they struggle to pump out and somehow dispose of the highly radioactive water dripping from below. Wait, now, the police couldn't go in and recover the bodies, 1,000 different bodies, but people are there working at the nuclear meltdown. A method called feed and bleed. But the method is reaching its limits because the tanks being used to hold the radioactive water are full. Well, the reactor would normally need 4,500 tons a minute. Not a ton a minute, but 4,500 tons a minute. 1 million gallons per minute. 1,440 minutes a day. The radiation levels are extremely high in some places. In Reactor 2, of course, Reactor 2 is the least threatening looking building, where it is highly likely the core is leaking. The core is 100% meltdown. And talking about 1,000 millisieverts, 1 million microsieverts per hour. You're talking about, first off, Reactor 2 liquefied. It burnt constantly for days. It had detonations. It's right alongside of Reactor 1, and on the other side is Reactor 3, the plutonium mixed oxide fuel reactor that melted down. So even if Reactor 2 didn't melt down, you couldn't get close to it because Reactor 3 is right alongside of it. Right, so that doesn't look very threatening. So this is why they use those particular connotations, because if you look up these reactors, it looks different, right? It looks very scary. You look at this one, it still looks like it's intact. But that's because the China syndrome went straight down into the earth. Remember, these buildings are 19-story, 65-meter, 190-foot buildings. Very big buildings. They're built very robust to take into account that they might have a hydrogen explosion. If they have a meltdown, then the first indication there's a nuclear meltdown is a hydrogen explosion. The hydrogen, created by this zirconium cladding melting down, which ignites the plutonium and uranium pellets. Workers desperately piling up sandbags in front of the tunnel exits, which are less than 328 feet from shore. So they're suggesting, like, first off, the tsunami ran right through the site. And right behind Reactor 4 and Reactor 3 was the common spent fuel pool, which is on the same street. So this tsunami would have ran right through the common spent fuel pool, which was storing reactor. And then the question is, why in 2021, when they released 700, well, somebody did, we don't know who actually done it, with no fanfare, and we're the only people I know that ever covered those pictures, all of them, from a high-quality drone. Reactor, the common spent fuel pool, and Reactor 6 were redacted. Why would you do that? But the ocean is already radioactive, even without this toxic soup leaking into it. Here's Reactor. There's a little video put together for Reactor 3. It's very short. It blew up. And then it was plutonium mixed oxide fuel. The fuel pools were at the top of the building. That's all gone. TEPCO also reported on Monday it found iodine-131 in seawater 5 million times the legal limits, as well as cesium 1.1 million times the legal limit near the water intakes of the Fukushima Daiichi No. 2 reactor. Right alongside of number 2 is Reactor 3 and 4. Yeah, Reactor 2 100% lost its entire inventories. Everything melted down. So 9 reactor cores melted down inside of Reactor 2. They went China syndrome deep into the earth. This reactor Medusa, the mixed oxide fuel reactor, ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools right out of the buildings. Reactor 4 detonated multiple times over several days and burnt continuously. It's hard to appreciate how big these pillars are, right? But if you were taking an SUV, a big SUV, you could actually spin it around on one of these supports, right? They're so big. It's hard to appreciate that they're actually 19-story buildings. 90% of those exposed to radiation work for subcontractors / the homeless. Have you ever heard of a nuclear scientist getting a radiation dose of Fukushima? Oh, that's right. You haven't, because they ain't going there. The homeless are not showing up. They're worried about the health. Went from 33 companies down to 2. Expected to take, again, this industry's entire legacy is predicated upon deceit, dishonesty, and genocide. 90% of the employees exposed to radiation in Japan nuclear plant work for subcontractors, not from the companies that own the plant. No, not 90%, all of it. Nobody's immune to radiation. If you go there, you're getting fatal doses or debilitating doses, right? This is weekends off at Fukushima. Now, one plant worker could be seen. Now, they allege that there's 7,000 employees every day there. This is absurd. These are nuclear meltdowns where they ejected the reactor cores all over the site. If you put 7,000 people there, several thousand will die each day. One of the workers said his pay ranged from 10,000 to 20,000 yen a day, 114 to 228. No, they were actually making around $11 US a day. Right? We've covered this many times before. This is a nuclear engineer talking about it, though, not a nuclear engineer there. But someone who works for a subcontractor can't afford to turn it down, 114 to 228 a day. That's simply not true. It's much less than that. It's 1/10 of that. In an array of catastrophes at Fukushima Daiichi, dangers at the spent fuel cooling ponds come into focus. Danger in the cooling ponds. And we've covered, this was the 16th. So on the 16th, this picture already existed. This is a different picture. This was taken a few weeks later. But this is what the reactors looked like on the 16th. Concerned about an uncontrolled reaction in the open with no containment vessels to offer protection is mounting. We suffered 2 fires since yesterday as the water in the cooling vessels has essentially boiled off. If the water in the cooling vessels are gone, so are the reactor cores. That's physics, right? That's just simply the way it works. Spent fuel cooling ponds. They call them ponds, right, to disenfranchise you from what they really are. If you put a fish in those so-called ponds, they die right away. Because the fuel is still splitting atoms. That's why they're in this. This is very special borated water to stop a criticality or a chain reaction from spontaneously happening. There is no vessel or containment, by the way, for the fuel pools. Has essentially boiled off. This was on the 16th of March, day 5. Well, it either did or it didn't. If it did, it's a nuclear meltdown. If it didn't, it's going to be a nuclear meltdown. So the cooling ponds are not the containments. They have no containment whatsoever at the top of the buildings. There's 2 of them on top of each building, and each of them got decades of reactor cores. If they boil off, they're gone. The situation with melting fuel also remains serious. Well, the fuel pools are much more dangerous than the reactor core because you have decades of reactor cores in them. It doesn't matter that they're older reactor cores. Once they go China syndrome, they're no different than any other China syndrome. They burn at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures, and they don't need oxygen, so you can't put them out. You can't smother them. Warned of a total fuel melt, and because it's so hot, you can't get boron close enough to it, or the control rods close enough to it to stop the reaction. It's a runaway, right? And that's forever. You can't change that. That's what the technology shouldn't exist because it's splitting atoms. There's no containment when you take the fuel out of the pool. Where are all the atoms going to go now? Straight into the atmosphere, forever. That's why almost all nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. Warned of a total fuel melt in the core of reactor number 2. Again, number 2, of course, is one of the few buildings that looks reasonable. Right alongside of it is reactor 1. It detonated in the fuel pool, and reactor number 3 on the other side of it is completely gone. That was a plutonium X-oxide reactor. And we see that radiation leaks from the plutonium fuel base number 3. Then the estimates and the numbers that they give out, we estimated it, on the 6%. you're looking at 24,000 pounds of plutonium. And there's a couple of kilograms of plutonium allegedly would kill all the species on the planet over time once everybody was infected by the atomic plague. And that's exactly what happened, right? And over time now we're seeing catastrophic health issues. And a lot of people are so, because you hear cancer so much, that they don't appreciate all the other illnesses and diseases and autoimmune deficiencies and injuries that'll manifest, right? It's not just cancer. Well, the only moderator I got here is Dana Nasana. And Dana's literally the last one to delete somebody. You gotta be pretty bad, man, for Dana to delete you. What's going on anyway? Yeah, hi everybody. Let's come over and check out the poll here. So I got a birthday on Saturday. One of the worst birthdays I've ever had, probably this one. And I got a birthday on Saturday. Now normally I would celebrate today as my birthday, October 2nd. And October 2nd was my parents' anniversary. And they've been gone a very long time. So it's a very difficult day for me every year. Some years I deal with it pretty good. Some years I don't. This year I didn't deal with it good at all. And I miss my parents, right? And I think everybody goes through that at some point in their lives. I sometimes just still find it hard to accept. And if Dad was alive, he'd be right alongside of me doing what I'm doing. I can tell you that much. He was an exceptional person. You know, when Dad died, he died when we were fishing, but his funeral was 4 days. And his youngest brother was the youngest officer ever commissioned into the Canadian Navy. He was on the Quest 172 out of Halifax. And he was here a couple of months ago and visited. Came up, sat in the studio, and I showed him all this stuff. He's almost 90 years old now. Still doing wonderful. And so he used to be, he was the relief skipper on the Edmonds Fitzgerald when she sank. It was his trip off. So a lot of people might know that story about the Edmonds Fitzgerald in the Great Lakes. And then he was commissioned, well, he was the youngest 100,000 ton ticket in Canada for ocean faring ships. So he was out at a very young age taking big ships all over the place. And one of his jobs was oil tankers. He would take up the St. Lawrence through the Great Lakes to the Americans. And that was a pretty cushy job, all things considered, right? And then he was doing, it was good money, right, on the Edmonds Fitzgerald. And then he worked for the Quest 172 out of Halifax. That was a research vessel that would tow a sophisticated listening device 18 miles or something behind him on a cable. And they were looking for nuclear missiles, nuclear subs in the Bermuda Triangle. And so they would spend 6-7 months a year in the Bermuda Triangle. And we got a lot of pictures when I was young. I actually met 2 astronauts on his boat when he came into St. John's. The interior of the boat is actually on casters where it can rotate. Where the boat would do the incredible pitching, and the interior would just almost stay still. It was an amazing boat. And what was the point I was trying to make here? Anyway, I had him in the studio, and I was running him through all of this stuff, and he sat back and he said, oh. He said, because a lot of the family don't understand you. He said, but now I see what's going on, right? They're not capable of understanding. Because they're not capable of opening their eyes and understanding. He said, so. He said, I'm so glad you showed me stuff because I didn't know. But anyway, I used to always celebrate my birthday on the 2nd, and then my birthday's actually Saturday, right? And yeah, I'm just not myself today. No matter how I try, I'm just not myself today. And now that the day is almost gone, I'm starting to come around a bit. But it's a tough day today for me. A long day, miserable day for me. And I got nobody on my side. Everybody's self-centered, right? And I don't blame people. Has Japan declared war on humanity by hiding nuclear fallout and shipping food from a nuclear wasteland? Now, tomorrow I'm supposed to go get my eyes done. And there's a lot going on. Trying to keep everything together, right? When I went in last weekend, I had to go in to order a phone. They gave me last year's model of the phone. I don't want that. I wanted this year's model. And they told me it was this year's model. It wasn't, right? So I had to make another trip into the city. And so I went over and filled up at Costco because it's 8 cents cheaper a liter or something, right? And the big truck, she's pretty rough on gas sometimes. And I didn't have much, so I put $60 in it. And then the next person came in, knew a trick or apparently, and so they were able to take $80 out of my account and put $80 extra gas in their car. So they robbed me of $160 that obviously someone like me can't afford anymore. And I'll probably get that back at some point. But tomorrow I'm supposed to go back in the city and get my eyes checked, or prescription for my eyes. Get real glasses, right? Because my eyes been holding out till I had the heart attack last year. I had 3 heart attacks, and they put 7 stints in. And when I come out of the hospital, I couldn't see anymore. I got to have some kind of glasses on. But up to that point, my eyes were unbelievably fine. It was unimaginably. And when I went to redo my driver's license the year before, they refused to acknowledge that my eyes would be okay. And so you had to, read they got that little box where you got to stick your face into it. And they say, yep, you're good to go. But at 65, you got to do a mandatory eye exam with the doctor. I said, yeah, whatever. I said, but once I had that heart attack, boom, my eyesight was screwed. And now it's getting worse. So I got to get real glasses. I got no choice now. And tomorrow's Thursday, right? Tomorrow's Thursday. Just try to get back on track here now because I digressed again. But it's a lot of. I'm under a lot of stress trying to keep this whole operation moving. Trying to keep everything. I got too big of an operation. Well, it's not too big. You need everything I got, but just keeping everything in neutral is all I'm really doing for the last year or two. In the hopes that I can get this operation back up and moving again. But it costs so much money to make this whole thing move. You can't do anything without a couple of $100. And then what happens if you have a breakdown? You don't have any money to make it back home with, right? What happens if you need a tow truck? What happens if you got to buy a battery and you're in the middle of nowhere? And what happens if you got to get something fixed? And the list goes on and on and on. So to try to mitigate that, I've built up a pretty big machine shop. Like the only thing I haven't got is the steel lathe to spin stuff. But I got pretty well everything else put together. And so I can fix most things myself, and I got the equipment to run with it. So over the long run, that'll pay off, right? And I've definitely gotten a lot better at welding. Oh, goodness gracious. I've definitely gotten real good. The trick to welding was you got to grind it down at least 3 or 4 times and then weld everything again in order to get a decent weld. Because I don't have a hugely expensive welder. I have a very cheap one. stick welder and a wire one. And the stick one's fantastic, but it's not like a really nice one where you can do the job in 1 or 2 passes. This one you got to make 4 different passes. That doesn't matter though. You get the job done, right? Yeah, I'm starting to ramble now, so I might as well give it up. Because once it starts rambling, it's pretty pointless for me to keep going. Let me see if we can finish out this story anyway. 1, 5, 10, 11, 12. 12 more to go. Maybe I can get through this. Critical coolant shortages and rising temperatures at reactor number 4. At reactor number 4. What was the date on this? I don't see the date on this one. Well, reactor 4 is to your left over there. It's totally gone. Essentially, oh yeah, I remember now. Boil off. Radiation leaks from plutonium fuel base number 3 reactor. Like number 3. That's not a leak. That's right behind me is number 3. That's not a leak. That's a completely. They ejected the reactor core and the fuel pools out of the buildings. And cast a worrying eye on the situation of the plant's fuel storage ponds. There is no storage ponds in all 4 of the buildings. You don't have that. You can't, and because you got 4 reactors melting down alongside of each other. You got 8 fuel pools melting down right alongside of each other. The whole site, and these are massive sites. You had a tsunami run through the site on top of everything else. There's no infrastructures, right? So everything just fell apart and melted down. Number 4 was shut down for repairs, but its fuel is still generating heat. So typically every 14, 15 months, they take 1/3, 1/4 of the fuel out of the reactor. The rest of it stays there. And they do around 11,000 different maintenances. They call it repairs, but it's around 11,000 maintenances is done around the site, including the reactors. And they bring in outside people to do that because they're going to get incredible doses. So they bring in a lot of transient workers for those jobs. So it don't show up in the statistics later on, right? The potential for a buildup of a controllable chain reaction in the fuel ponds there in the open air is even more likely than it was in the reactor cores of the embattled reactor 1, 2, 3. Said the chairman of the ERC, Bellalona, St. Petersburg. Like they would have seen the pictures that I showed you, okay? And they knew the reactors were gone. They knew the fuel pools were gone. But the cover story, as we looked at all this week and the end of last week, that's kind of what I'm doing. Trying to do is show you that the cover story was set in stone that first week. The official story from day 1 was the cover story. And that story is still going strong today, and it's gotten a little bit more sadistic, right? Where they claim now nothing got out of the buildings. It was equal to 3 grams of sugar. As South Korean had said last year, professor of nuclear and quantum engineering. Very incredible credentials, but absurd to suggest that nothing got out of the reactors and what did was equal to 3 grams of sugar. It's absurd. But that was sanctioned by United Nations, the International Atomic Energy Agency. The worst humans imaginable. By the unorthodox method, Japan has been suggesting to cool it, such as dumping water from a helicopter, which would not bring about an explosion. Which would not bring about an explosion, but a lot of sparks. Would not bring about an explosion. Well, it already detonated by that time, didn't it? But a lot of sparks. So what did it have to it? There's no electricity there. I just despise these scumbags. They've destroyed humanity and the 8 million species. so they can pretend that they're somebody's hero. He summed up by saying, it's hard to make the situation worse than it is. Yeah, well, all the reactors have already blown up. You made it worse by telling that lie, see? You have 4 more to get through here. He said of the fuel pond situation that it's very serious because the fuel is outside of any kind of containment. This increases radiation, which people could be subjected, such as cesium, strontium, uranium, whatever the hell that is. I think they meant to say uranium, and perhaps plutonium. Like, if you're an expert, then you know. And using the word cesium, which is the British terminology, and this guy is from Bologna. Why is he using that connotation, I wonder? Each reactor, Fukushima Daiichi, has its own spent nuclear fuel pond. Each reactor has 2 fuel ponds. And because they don't have a repository, everything is stored in the fuel ponds. Where else are you going to put it, right? Protect people in the vicinity from gamma. What about X-rays? What about betas? What about neutrons? What about alpha? But the water pond and the level, if any, is unknown. So if there's no water there, if any, meant they'd melted down. Just like Benjamin Netanyahu is melting down as we talk here. I can tell you one thing. If he attacks Iran, Iran's going to attack their nuclear too. And then they're going to, a couple of years down the road, they're going to blame the extinction event on that event instead of Fukushima, aren't they? They're going to blame it on the Muslims. India's not very happy. They got nuclear. China's not very happy. They got nuclear. Russia's supplying Iran. They got nuclears. Would Russia give Iran some tactical nukes in case Of course they would. Look what they've done to Syria, for goodness sakes. Look what they got done to Ukraine. Look what they've done to Afghanistan for a decade. It's clear they wouldn't hesitate, right? I mean, Russia could wipe Israel out with a single bomb. Benjamin Netanyahu, the minute the war is over, after it does stop, he's getting arrested. I'll change these glasses. I got another set. These are just cheap reading glasses, right? But if I don't use them, I can't read the screen without a lot of problems. And that's only because of the heart attack. Apparently, who knows, That's a lot better. Water level in any ponds is unknown. So that's March the 16th. Oh, we're not through all this shit. We still got 1, 2, 3, 4. Still got 20 more to get through. They're pretty quick stuff, though. The top of the reactor buildings in Reactor 4 is crammed with both spent nuclear fuel as well as fresh fuel. Like, first off, you're not going to put fresh fuel in the fuel pools, okay? There's no need to. It's not volatile yet. It's only volatile once it goes through a chain reaction. Why would it be in the common spent fuel or in the fuel pool at the top of the buildings? And also houses old spent fuel rods spanning many years, decades, 4 decades, not years. If official information is correct, the fuel pools is shoulder to packed with rods that would generate heat even if there was water. Now, the water has to circulate in the spent fuel pools. Once water that bore the thermal temperature energy away stopped circulating after the quake and tsunami, the water would have reached boiling point. If it reached boiling point, then it continues to evaporate. Like, it's going to boil off 120,000 liters a day, even with all in a perfect reactor fuel pool. It boils off 120,000 liters a day in each pool. And it does that by splitting atoms. The atoms are in the water. When the water boils away, it liberates the atom now into the biosphere. the fuel is still splitting atoms. This is why it makes heat. This is how each reactor core boils water for a million homes and businesses. Boils water to create power for a million homes and businesses. And the way it does it is splitting atoms. When it's in a reactor, it's in a containment, allegedly. But we know it's not, because it gets what they call burped out of the torus, and then it goes up the tall, skinny stack. And so it's pretty suspect that you can contain all these atoms in the reactor during the 14-15 months. Like, these nuclear plants are not surrounded by farms because it's a coincidence. It's the best way to get the local radiation numbers down each year. And the best way to get you dead or severely sick for the rest of your life. The water would have reached boiling points. Once it reaches boiling, you can lose the whole pool in one day if it boils. And should the boiling persist, once the fuel rods are exposed, they immediately catch fire. The zirconium cladding immediately ignites. And then that will burn at 1800 degrees. That'll burn the fuel rods. The fuel pellets now will burn at 9,000 degrees. And everything boils off immediately on a flash. And then she goes poof. And we've seen at least 4 examples of that in Japan. Fuel rod would be exposed to the open air, something that could, according to the studies, will cause it to melt down. That's what caused the hydrogen, is the fuel is exposed, it melts down. That creates the hydrogen from the zirconium claddings. And then if you introduce, that'll displace the oxygen. If you introduce oxygen in, then that'll detonate it, or a spark. According to a 2006 study by the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, cited by the LA Times. Well, a lawyer is a lawyer. We're talking about journalists. And a journalist is the most dangerous creature in history. They won't hesitate to destroy your life and everybody else's life. A journalist is somebody that hates your guts, just like a nuclear scientist. Which may explain yesterday's 2 fires at the pond. 2 fires at the pond. 2 fires at the pond. That was on the 15th they're talking about. March the 15th, 2011. 2 fires at the pond. Which pond, though? I don't know off the top of my head here. But, oh my goodness. That's some statement, eh? During the second fire, the cause of which has not been established, radiation in the region of the plant spiked to 167 times normal. During the second fire, the cause of which was not established, well, you got no water, the zirconium cladding caught fire. That's what caused the fire. The fuel rods were exposed to air and they caught fire. That's how it works. Radiation in the region of the plant spiked 167 times normal. The degenerate International Atomic Energy Agency, despicable mass murdering monsters, said. The exact level of water in the pool has not been established due to high levels of radioactivity. And so, because they can't go there and quantify it on the 16th, they can deny it, see? Plausible deniability. And so they did. If the rods become exposed to air, according to the National Academy of Science report, their zirconium tubes begin to react with oxygen and heat up even more type of oxidation fire. At some point, the material inside the tubes melts and can release highly radioactive isotopes such as cesium-137, iodine-131. No, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod is the curium isotopes. And you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium, for goodness sakes. According to the latest news on Wednesday in Europe, whatever water remains in the pond is boiling and no effort at cooling the pond. Number 4 have succeeded, according to the Russian. The metal reacting with the steam is leading to hydrogen production. No, the zirconium cladding produces the hydrogen. That's where the hydrogen comes from. It's burning. And then the gas is a lot of hydrogen. And the hydrogen displaces the oxygen. And if you reintroduce oxygen, oxygen will cause hydrogen to detonate. which could explode as it has so many times before at the plant. As it has so many times before. And TEPCO's beginning to raise the alarm about the fuel pan as well. So what did he mean by that? As it has so many times before at the plant. Well, the only time you had explosion was post-tsunami. In the worst case, the ponds could explode, and there's a large chance that that's the TEPCO representative. In this case, the substances that are stored in special containers would explode in the open. And TEPCO has earlier alerted Japanese nuclear safety agencies of this eventuality. First off, TEPCO is not a decommission authority. They're not a nuclear expert. They're an operator. They don't build reactors. They don't make fuel. They're not authorities. Why would they be telling the nuclear regulatory agencies, who are the authorities, how it works? Given TEPCO's own acknowledgement that the danger is at hand, the fuel pan issue is one of the central dangers. This is March the 16th, by the way, this story. And why the water levels fell in the cooling pan is not yet known, because it boiled off. And then it caught fire. This may have been leaks due to the earthquake, or may have been fires that helped burn it away. Fires don't burn water. This was because the fuel, the water, if it's not circulating, the fuel will start heating up, right? The used fuel is, it's only 3% of the fuel is used. The problem with the fuel is, after 14 months in the reactors, they got trillions of microscopic cracks. So they're very fragile. And so they can't be used anymore. But only 3% of the inventory is used. And I shouldn't even put it frame it that way, really. Because how do you explain this anyway? Like, if you take a battery, like a normal battery, and say the battery is only at 80% now. When you charge it up, it only holds 80% of a charge. Well, you can't go into the battery and remove the 20% that doesn't charge, because that's not how it works, right? And so with fuel, it's the same thing. And so 3% of it's, because originally when you light up these reactors, when you fire up these reactors, start that chain reaction. Now let's keep going here. According to the degenerate BBC, who spoke with Lawrence Williams, specialist in nuclear safety, the fuel rods burn and are left without water. Well, if they burn, it's because they got no water. And then the rest of the water disappears. There's a risk that the fuel rod cladding will be damaged. Again, this is simply not the way it works. There's uranium pellets and plutonium pellets. But the pellets are covered in zirconium. They're put into a rod that is a zirconium cladding. It's a zirconium rod itself. So the uranium and plutonium physically don't touch each other, because you would have a meltdown. So they have zirconium claddings, because zirconium can handle pretty high temperatures. So when this zirconium was the same stuff you would put in your cameras in the dirty 30s and that, and you would break the glass, and then when oxygen rushed in, the zirconium would flash, and that's how you would take your picture. That's there was nuclear waste every time a camera bulb was shot in the 20s and 30s and 40s. It left behind radioactive waste, highly toxic waste from zirconium, basically. I call it a radioactive waste, but I guess that's not 100% true. It is when it's in the reactors because of the neutron bombardments. But zirconium is very volatile to oxygen, right? That's how so this stuff in the fuel pools, when the water drops down, because it's boiling off, the water's not circulating, so it heats up very quickly. The water always has to circulate or it's going to melt down. There's no way to add water to it. And so it typically burns off evaporates off 120,000 liters a day in each pool. And, the earthquake could have ruptured the pool and lost its inventory. But it would have detonated the minute within 10-15 minutes of the fuel rod being exposed, there's so much zirconium gas, it's very easy to see that there could be an explosion imminent from it. You got three more to get through here. To avert this, water is needed, but water itself is a neutron moderator and could, however, slight the chance, reinvigorate a criticality or a chain reaction in the rods. Well, the special water, you get the minerals out of the water, and then they add boron to the water to stop the neutrons from becoming too excited. This leaves TEPCO between the devil and the deep blue sea. Earlier, helicopters' dumps on the fuel ponds were abandoned because of excessive radiation above number 4. We showed that video last night or the night before, I can't remember. It was symbiotic. All 600 helicopter pilots at Chernobyl died. Like, how can an employee work there when a helicopter can't get near it? The industry is really good at lying. That's literally the only thing they're good at. Lying and being scummy. Like, nuclear shouldn't exist because you can't contain the emissions. And so eventually you're going to destroy everything anyway. And the problem is right now that I love this stuff, these stories, these original stories, because I think they bring a lot to the conversation, right? You got some insight from the original days, and now you can extrapolate. You can see the cover story, can't we, from the first couple of weeks, even the first 5 days actually, and all the stuff we covered so far this week. That's now the same cover story, and it was patently false. But back then it was, because we have the luxury of hindsight. But back then it was very hard to know what was going on, right? Because you had the media was flooded with the tsunami depictions. I mean, stuff was horrific. That was heartbreaking to see. That was just gut-wrenching. That was gut-wrenching. Okay, I'm going to give it up tonight. Let's close down the poll. Has Japan declared war on humanity by hiding nuclear fallout and shipping food from the nuclear wasteland? Yeah, and Japan hasn't stopped growing food in the nuclear wasteland. We got 32 votes. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for everybody that voted. We appreciate it. We got 32 likes, which is more likes than we got on the entire video that we done last night to tonight. It still hasn't got 32 likes. So last night's video was censored. Unbelievable, eh? And then I'm starting to wonder, did Israel do that to me? Once Iran launched missiles towards them, because it's clear that I've produced videos on Israel that shows Israel is definitely not very nice people. And so I could be considered an enemy. Did they do that with similar people out there? Or was that just another nuclear industry attack upon me? Because it was around, when that happened, that was around a time when Iran had launched those supersonic ballistic missiles. And the Israelis' Iron Dome failed. They lost around at least 20 F-35 fighter jets. And Mossad's main building was pretty devastated. Like, Benjamin Netanyahu was crazy enough to attack the nuclear power plants. He's crazy enough, right? He's on a rampage for almost a year now. And you can tell he wants a war with Iran. And he knows the Americans are the American government, the military-industrial complex, not just America, it's going to be France. And you've seen United Kingdom Prime Minister came out with 2 Israeli flags behind him and said, well, Israel's a sovereign state, they can do what they want. Well, Iran's a sovereign state, they can do what they want too, right? You despicable piece of shit. That's it for Dana. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. And then let's hope Israel and Iran doesn't escalate any worse than what it already is. I won't be surprised, right? Because if somebody does, like, Israel has never fought a real war. That's the thing with Israel. They've never fought somebody with 4,000 tanks, never fought anybody with fighter jets and helicopters and satellites and drones. They never fought a standing army. They've always fought the coward war. And it's never a war, right? They're always superior everything. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. I'm going to end on a song you might not have heard before. It's called Calm Down Charlie. It was a stalker. Still going strong, baby. I don't see that song slowing down anytime soon. And it's got a fun beat to it. It's about a troll that trolled us for over a decade, called Calm Down Charlie. A despicable subhuman man, allegedly from Japan. We'll see everybody tomorrow night. Have a great night, great day tomorrow. We'll see everybody on the next show. Take care, folks.
In the Tokyo Bureau, swirling smoke and neon beams. Chicago division, fueled by heated dreams. Calm down, Charlie calls in, voice smooth as silk. Says, Dana, you're dreaming, don't cry over spilt milk. On Dana Durnford show, the chatter's turning wild, but Charlie shoots it down with that cool cat style. Unit 3's no killer, no harm to see life. He chuckles in the static, cuts through the strife. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show. With a snap and a grin, Charlie's voice so clear scatters the dread, dispels all the fear. Mux didn't hurt, he croons with a sigh. Science is for thinkers, not a whim or lie. Though Dana and the crowd may shout and roar, Charlie's unfazed, he's heard it all before. His swinging rationale, like a soothing song, says, hold on to logic, we gotta stay strong. Oh, calm down, Charlie, with his nuclear charm. He says starfish are just fine, there's no alarm. His words dance on airwaves with a confident glow. Calm down, Charlie steals the whole radio show.